Hi, everybody. Welcome to Truth Wanted, a show about getting to the bottom of beliefs, whether it's Christ or karma, Bigfoot or crystals. We want to know how you know it's true. Welcome to another unofficial live stream of this show. Today, joining me is Godless Engineer of YouTube fame. Godless Engineer, otherwise, can I just call you John?
Yeah, you can just call me John.
John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, and yeah, I usually say like famous, like or YouTube fame.
That's correct. Yeah, yeah. So John has been doing the YouTube game for a few years now, right?
Yeah, I think about 2012 was when I actually created the account, and I've only been really going heavy at it for like the past two and a half years.
Mm-hmm. And you have been creating kind of skeptic content. I mean, your channel covers the whole gamut of things. I think you've talked about flat earthers. You've talked about all kinds of woo. I mean, tell me more about your channel and what you do.
Well, yeah, I pretty much try to post 5 days a week from Monday to Friday. And then Fridays, I usually do 2 videos. One is a regular video. The other one is a live stream, which I actually have a live stream tonight at 8:30 p.m. Central, where we discuss flat Earth and pseudoscience, basically. And so I do that. On Mondays, I post like a response video of some type. Tuesdays are our Bible podcast that I run with KC, my girlfriend. And then Wednesdays, usually comment videos. And then I think I'm going to start making Thursdays kind of like a throwback kind of day where I take a portion of one of my past live streams and I kind of cut that out and I put it up on that day. And then on Fridays, it's kind of a toss-up. I usually do interviews of some sort. So on top of the Flat Earth Fridays that I do at night. So that's pretty much what I do. The response videos that I cover are pretty much anything where science and atheism and politics kind of overlap, anything in that kind of realm. Here lately, though, it's been a lot of like anti-science debunk that I've been doing. So it's been a wild ride so far.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that you upload 5 days a week, which is buck wild. And you work a regular job as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah. 40 hours a week.
Yeah, I don't know how you do it, man. I mean, that's a lot of content. So if you ever go check out John's channel, he's got plenty of stuff for you to watch. And and also go check out his live stream after the show as well. For folks that are just tuning in, we are having a bit of trouble with our calls tonight. I will let you know if they will be available later on. But right now, we are having a bit of trouble. So if you're trying to call in and we're not accepting your calls, that is why. However, if you go ahead and type your calls into the chat, your questions into the chat, or whatever else you want to talk about, hopefully we'll be able to catch up with those later on. But first, I just kind of want to talk a little bit more about John and what he does and what your kind of approach is. I mean, you just upload a whole range of content on different things. What got you started into this? I mean, what's the whole deal? Why Godless Engineer? What is the need for your channel out there?
Well, actually, I came up with the moniker Godless Engineer right after I graduated with my master's in software engineering. And I was just sitting there one day kind of with nothing to do. And I was just like, well, if I were to make something, what would I make it? And I tried out different things. And I was like, well, I don't want to be just another atheist, atheist this or atheist that kind of thing. And so I came up with Godless Engineer. I eventually worked my way there. And so I started out on Facebook first, posting a lot of memes and just general like infographics. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen this one kind of popular like Mormon meme where it's got a Mormon temple and it's a dark one, a Mormon temple. And then at the bottom, it kind of summarizes like how Joseph Smith started out getting arrested for fraud. And then he turned around and used the same methods to create the Mormon religion. I made that one as well as a number of ones that's been shared kind of on Facebook and places a good bit. And so that's kind of where I got started. And then I started doing videos as like a next step in my activism kind of, because I was really wanting to be more activist-y and more than just, posting on Facebook and stuff. And so I felt like, doing videos, showing my face, showing that I'm not afraid to stand up and use my voice as my moniker would or not my moniker, but my, theme or
Your
slogan
tagline.
would end up
Yeah.
being tagline. Just showing people that, I wasn't afraid, to show my face and whatnot, I felt would empower people. And that's kind of been my focus, really, is I targeted my audience to be people that are already atheists that were looking for, other atheists to kind of shoot the shit with. I don't know. Can I curse on here?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. You can say whatever the hell you want. So,
okay.
But just backtracking a bit, you weren't always an atheist, correct?
Oh, no.
Yeah, you did. You grew up, was it Catholic home? Is that right? Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I grew up Catholic. I went to a Catholic private school, but it was not really all that like hardcore, into like the Catholic faith. It was always taught to me as like God is just, something that and so I never really gave it a lot of thought. Like people told me, oh, Jesus existed and he did these things and that things and he died for you and all this other stuff. And I had to learn all the stations of the cross and all this other stuff. And it was really weird how just like, I guess natural it was for me to just be like, oh yeah, God exists. And it wasn't until like a friend of mine was like, you got to believe the Bible 100% or you're not a real Christian. And so I just sat there and I was like, well, I can't say that I'm a real Christian then. Of course, now I know that it's a no true Scotsman fallacy, but eventually I was able to reason my way kind of out of that mindset. But I guess it kind of helped that by that point I was already in the kind of non-denominational type of faith of Christian. And so it was kind of an easy transition out of that. I went from Catholic to kind of Baptisty to non-denominational. So it was kind of like a gradual decline, I guess, out of the faith.
So what was, give me a look of what reasons you were using or what methods you were using more, like, I guess, to kind of change your minds on these things. Were you like reading more atheist material? I mean, like, what was the influence that was telling you to go the other way?
Well, basically what I did was I just kind of started looking at I guess, secular or more anti-religious content. And it's not so much that I was looking to convince myself that God wasn't there. I was looking at the other side of the conversation. Like I was looking at, okay, well, and I use this in my approach to my mythicist position as well, is, I was like, okay, well, if God exists, surely there's evidence to say that he does. And if I can't find evidence to say that he does, then there's no reason for me to say that he actually exists. And so when I started looking at all of the arguments and the counter arguments, I just found the counter arguments to be way more compelling. For one thing, they had a lot of science behind them, and not that all of science, I guess, it should be trusted, because there are some quacks out there operating under the guise of science and whatever. So it's not necessarily that, but it's more of the, I guess what you would say, the parsimony of the counter arguments. Like, how well do they fit together? How well does it explain the evidence and explain what we see? And so, like, I came to the conclusion, like, well, if we have natural explanations for things, then there doesn't need to be a God involved.
Really? Okay. So let me ask you about this. So empirical verification is a method for you that you use to determine whether something is more true, if we can kind of demonstrate it through science. Is that what I'm getting from that, or would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I've always tried to find answers that remove my own personal bias. Like if I could find an answer that was kind of like outside of myself to verify what I was thinking, then I would feel secure. Like I would feel rational in believing in that one certain thing, because, this was something completely out of my control, completely outside of me in general. And it was proving that, this thing is true and this thing is false, or this thing isn't true, rather, because it just because something is true doesn't necessarily mean something's false. Like, just because evolution is true doesn't mean that the existence of God is false.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, I actually agree with you on that. And I think at least when I was a Christian, I kind of held a more nuanced position than a lot of my friends did growing up in kind of the Baptist town that I lived in, because I had never had a problem with things like evolution and basically science in general as having truth value to me, at least telling me true things about the world. But it was always the kind of historical accounts of things in the Bible, especially, that I had more problems with. And speaking of which, and we don't have to talk about this if you don't want to, because I know probably a lot of people talk to you, but you are probably one of the only atheists I know, at least through our circle of friends that we know, that openly advocates for Christ mythicism. Right.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I love talking about that.
Yeah. So just give me a brief overview, because so as far as me, I wouldn't say I'm more or less convinced of Jesus Christ being a mythical figure. I think that the arguments do hold merit. I'm closer to 50-50 if I had to give an assessment of myself right now. But what do you think for you is the best reason why you believe that Jesus wasn't a historical figure at all?
Well, the way that I approached it initially was that, if I'm going to be having these arguments online and I'm going to be saying stuff like, well, Jesus definitely existed, then I need to have proof to show people oh, yes, of course, here's the thing. For instance, with Pontius Pilate, it's not just, oh, he's mentioned, so therefore he existed. It's we have physical evidence. We have this this Pilate rock where somebody had built, it was a building or something, and they chiseled Pilate and they chiseled in his rank and all that other kind of stuff. So, I mean, we know that Pilate existed in history, and we know that other figures in history actually existed. But when you critically examine the actual evidence for Jesus existing, you don't find such solid proof. I mean, you have Paul, who's the first one to actually mention anything about Jesus that we have writings for and whatnot. And even he never places Jesus on earth. And then if you fast forward to the Gospels, you've got Mark, who never mentions anything about his birth or anything like that. And he has Jesus being inhabited by the Messiah. And then when Jesus dies, the Messiah leaves his body and everything like that. So it's more of an adoptionist kind of gospel. And so it doesn't really take that much more to go to, well, maybe he didn't exist in the first place, because we don't have any clear indication that he did. And we know that legends can develop really quick. And if you were to just lazily say, well, he had to exist in order to create it, well, you could say that for Hercules or Zeus or any of those others that were euhemerized in the past, that were given, historical accounts as their background, but they were actually mythical figures. So to me, it seems more likely that he didn't exist and that stuff was just made up about a figure from Judaism that was supposed to come back and save the Jewish people.
Okay, so I think I would agree with you in the sense that the evidence that people usually cite for it is pretty faulty in my eyes. As far as, if we're talking about gospel accounts, I am not of the belief that the gospels are a firsthand account of any events of Jesus's life. And, we can kind of date these back to at least 40 years after Jesus would have supposedly been alive. So going back a bit, I just want to see what would change your mind on that topic. If, for example, we could confirm that the Gospels were actually written in the lifetime of Jesus and were actually firsthand accounts of the events that they purport to describe, would that change your confidence as to Jesus being a real person or not?
Well, I mean, if we had actual firsthand accounts that were that detailed.
Let's say it's just the four Gospels.
Well, right. But I mean, if it was the four Gospels and they were all, and it's all of them were firsthand accounts, I would still have a lot of questions about that because they're so radically different, in what they teach. So, but I mean, I would concede to say that if the Mark gospel, like just the Mark gospel, because we know that Matthew and Luke were copied from Mark, and then John is a completely separate Christian group that existed way after Mark did. So Mark is the first gospel that we have in history. And so if it were definitively proven that Mark was a firsthand account of Jesus, I think it would be more likely to believe that was an indication that Jesus actually existed in history than any of the other gospels. But the problem with that is that it definitely wasn't written until after 70 AD. And it actually espouses the idea that Jesus, or not Jesus, but the Messiah figure was an existent archangel that inhabited this human body of Jesus. And then when the human body died, the Messiah went back up into heaven. So, I mean, still, you kind of have this spiritual kind of sense, but I think that it would maybe point to a real historical figure that was like, I'm the Messiah, and he was running around and stuff. But I mean, even then, like, you know, there's still the utter lack of local historians that don't record like that particular kind of Messiah at all in that area. So, I mean, you would still have to wrestle with that, but I think that that would definitely like be a problem for like the mythicist position. I think if you could prove that Mark was a firsthand account, which sadly it's not.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So, you know, I'm always trying to look for falsifiability. I'm always trying to look for, well, if this happened, would this be true? You know, and I think you're right in that even if, and first of all, the Gospels, not all of them proclaim to be eyewitness accounts, especially Luke, but even if they were from the same time period as Jesus and claim to be firsthand accounts of these events, it would still be subject to question. I would say maybe my confidence would change a little bit, but certainly not enough, because how many eyewitness accounts do we have of crazy things that happen that aren't true, like all the time? Certainly not 2,000-year-old ones that are describing these miraculous events that, you know, if we only had 4 accounts of, would be rather suspicious. You know, I mean, we would expect even more. And like you said, local historians don't, as far as we know of, account for the events of Jesus's life. And so, yeah, that's interesting. So it sounds like you have a pretty good case, in my opinion, of the Christ myth theory. Like I said, I don't know how I feel about accepting it all the way, but I think there is a good case for it, for sure. And it's one of those things where it's like, if I'm talking to somebody who is like a fundamentalist Christian, I wouldn't even bring it up. But amongst friends who I can have these kinds of conversations with, I'm more convinced than I'm not, if that makes sense. I wouldn't hold to it either way, but you know, that's neither here nor there. So that's interesting. So I wanted to talk to you, John, specifically on the show this week because of some incidents that have happened this week with the Catholic Church. Because I assume I wasn't 100% sure, but I was pretty sure you came from a Catholic background, and I know that the current events probably have affected people that you know of, in the sense that I'm sure you have relatives that are still Catholic and that are probably talking about this. Have they mentioned this to you? Have you had conversations with them? What has that been like?
Well, actually, I don't talk to most of my family.
Okay.
My dad's side of the family is all pretty much Catholic, but interesting thing there is that one of my uncles that had recently died, he was actually a victim of priest abuse, sexual abuse, and it's still amazing to me that like my family members just were still part of the Catholic Church, even though, you know, like he was abused by a priest. And so I don't know. It really does kind of hit home for me, I guess. The grand jury finding and especially when I watch Spotlight, because I mean I have an 8-year-old son, and reading a lot of these stories, I mean I believe KC more than a few times looked over at me and was like, you know, I wouldn't be able to stop you from killing these guys.
You are a pretty big guy. Yeah, that's. Wow. Yeah, you know, I've read the reports. I haven't read the whole 1,400-page report, mind you. I've read summaries of the reports, and I can't even repeat a lot of the stuff that has come out of that. And it is really, really, I mean, disgusting, if anything. But what I'm interested in this kind of conflict is how people are dealing with the cognitive dissonance of supporting an organization that they know has done these things, but not willing to necessarily leave that organization. And that happens with lots and lots of people all the time for all sorts of things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not picking on people for staying true or staying with something that they've already clearly identified with, clearly have a lot of connections with, family ties with, social ties with, because I had the same problem when I was trying to leave my faith. But what do you think is the rationalization that's going on? Because I know that when you were a Catholic, you knew that this was already a problem, I'm sure, based on past incidences. Like, what is the mindset that goes on when these kinds of things come up?
Well, when I was a Catholic, though, like I stopped being Catholic when I was about 8 or 9 or so. So, I mean, I was pretty well sheltered from all of this. And I didn't even learn about my uncle until he was pretty much on his deathbed, that he had been abused by a priest. But the best example that I've seen has been the Catholic League, actually. Bill Donahue. He recently put out an 11-page paper where he apparently debunks the entire grand jury finding. And the basic basically the mentality that he espoused there was that, denial. I mean, he denies that these kids were ever abused. He uses straw man arguments in order to say that, the abuse isn't all that bad in the Catholic Church. And because he uses things like, none of the priests were actually charged with a crime, so they're not actually pedophiles or not actually predatory priests. But it's like the only reason why they're not charged with a crime is because of the statute of limitations. And in reality, the statute of limitations doesn't matter to reality. The fact is that these priests preyed upon these children. And there's multiple reports and corroborating evidence that cements all of these priests into their pedophile nature. So pretty much it's just been denial and saying that, the church, don't leave Jesus because of Judas or something like that. They harp on the idea that the church is what Jesus made and that it's no single person or it's no group of people. It's not the priests or anything like that. It's the church. But at the same time, the church is the hierarchy of the priesthood and everything. But people try to focus on the faith rather than the organization.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. I mean, bad stuff happens in Christian churches all the time, it doesn't have to be this scandalous in nature, but there's controversy and there's drama. And I can even remember my own experiences of being these people just they were either Satanists in disguise, they were either not true believers, there was a whole litany of options you could pick from, but they weren't real Christians. And that was the main point. And I think that's something I've been seeing a lot with these allegations recently as well, of these guys saying they aren't real Catholics because no real Catholic would be doing this, or just kind of putting the responsibility on someone else that isn't Catholic for some reason or another, even victim blaming in some cases, and it's wild. I think, gosh, I don't know being a victim of those families, what it must be like to hear that, but I can't imagine it's very good.
Yeah, I mean, I know I would be furious about it, especially if Bill Donahue came and said, well, your son actually wasn't raped. It's no, he was. Okay. So, I mean, I think that the families that are, affected by this and hearing Bill Donahue speak, or these other people that are these weren't real priests. I mean, I think that they would be quite offended because these were priests. I mean, these were people that were respected in the community. There's a really good documentary out there called Mea Maxima Culpa. And basically it chronicles Father Murphy, who abused hundreds of kids, deaf children, up in Wisconsin. So, I mean, this is and he was a respected figure like in that community, and he died a respected figure in the Catholic Church. So, you know, they want to act like, oh, these weren't real priests or these weren't real Catholics or whatnot. But the fact of the matter is that they were, and they used faith in order to convince these children that what they were doing to them was okay.
Yeah, I got in some trouble on Twitter like 2 weeks ago because some people were saying I wasn't a real Christian because I left the faith, and real Christians don't leave the faith because it says so in, can't even remember the verse off the top of my head, but you know, it's this no true Scotsman of, well, you know, if you really had the joy of Jesus Christ in your heart, you wouldn't have never left because it just compels you to do these things. And at that point, I would argue, well, that becomes almost a scientific claim because you're saying that I'm physically unable to do something if these certain conditions are met. And that's something that we can kind of test for, right? But anyway, it's an identity thing, in my opinion. It's like, oh, we don't associate with these people anymore. You know, that's what excommunication is all about, right? I mean, it's like, it's trying to keep face with people and saying, no, you can still trust these people. But I don't know if I was a Catholic in the Philadelphia area, I don't know how I would feel about going to Catholic church the next Mass, even if it wasn't someone in my diocese. I never get that right. You know, I would wonder, at least I would hope that they would wonder, because I mean, that's a safe place for people to go to. Usually it should be. Yeah.
Well, I did see a Reddit post actually in the Our Catholicism subreddit, and it was a mom that was saying how she is only going to be going to a diocese where they have like the traditional kind of confession booths where it's like it's where the priest is over here and the other person is on the other side, and they're separated, like clearly separated, because apparently she was part of a church that had where they didn't have that. It was like they would just go into his office and shut the door, and she just was not comfortable with that anymore, and she wasn't going to let it happen. And I mean, she felt bad about having to do that, but she also has to protect her daughter, and I think that's a smart move on her. And I don't think that Catholics necessarily just need to up and leave the faith in general, but I think that leaving the Catholic organization I think that that's important because, you know, they funnel money into protecting pedophiles. They still do. I believe they paid out like $4 billion in 1 year recently to, silence victims. And so they have this massive budget to like handle legal like claims and stuff against them, and that's just the sexual abuse claims. We're not talking about like Father John crashed the car into Leroy walking down the street. This is like sexual abuse cases that they're paying out to, and they're spending $4 billion on silencing victims.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking and it's tragic, and I hate everything about it. It's awful. And some of the worst things I've seen are people who are using this as part of their personal narrative, who are saying, oh, like this is a trial and a tribulation for our church, but we will get past this and we will move on. And these people are gone now, and we just have to, it's one thing to say, yeah, we need to start over and make things afresh, but it's another thing to say that this is all part of a plan. Like I also made a post on Twitter today of something I saw on the r/Catholicism subreddit of someone saying, this actually confirms my faith to be even more true, because Jesus said there would be false prophets, and that there would be people who are snakes in the church, basically, who are trying to do these awful things. And if any, and my post was basically, if anything can confirm your faith to be true, then it's unfalsifiable. And if it's unfalsifiable, then we can't know it to be true, right? I mean, we can't test it. So
Well,
It's
and also that particular prophecy or whatnot is a lot like saying, "Oh, a black car is going to cross your path," or something like that, or maybe a black cat will cross your path at some point in your life. Like, I mean, it's so vague that it's like, "Oh, of course that's going to happen." I mean, you have like the rest of time for the, or at least the rest of the Christian church in order for false prophets and challenges to occur. And it's like, of course they're going to occur.
yeah.
I mean, you know, you don't have to tell me, oh, I predict that the light will turn green and it like turns green. That's not a prophetic statement. That's just pointing out something that you know will happen.
Yeah. Based on previous like signs that we can witness, you know, and not signs, but like observations that we can make. You know, we can make observations and make predictions based off those observations, and that's not prophecy. That's not magic. That's just science. You know, so it's really fascinating. But anyway, Truth Wanted is a show about communication. It's about talking with people about their beliefs and why they think it's true. And so our phones aren't working yet. But if you have any questions about those kinds of topics, or if you want to hear my opinion or John's opinion about anything, our phones aren't working right now, but you can go ahead and type in our chat, and we'll go ahead and read them, and we'll kind of have conversations about that. So like I said, if you want to ask me or John anything, or if you just want us to talk about certain topics, go ahead and type it in the chat, and we are more than happy to talk about it. But while we're waiting on people to type those out, John, I want to know more about your way of talking with people, because I know that you do response videos, and I know that you have had conversations with people who do not hold your worldviews. What is your method for doing that? What's your philosophy?
Well, as far as the response videos go, those are targeted to a more atheist audience, like a more, or I guess I should say more secular / atheist audience, because that's me having fun with like a video that somebody's put up, and it's like a raw kind of version of me. And Casey's always saying that, like, oh, there's no difference in him in the response videos and what, you know, how he is at home. That's literally how he is, just amplified a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that's just me having fun. But when I'm actually sitting down to have a conversation with somebody, I try to actually have a conversation with them. You know, I try to let them finish their thoughts or what they're saying. I try not to interrupt, even though that's still hard for me. And I tried to figure out why they think certain things or how they came to a particular conclusion. And then I try to throw in like reasons to doubt that. Like, it's not really like any kind of street epistemology type of way about it, because I actually do throw in like things that prove them wrong. But I try to figure out why they think something is true or why they feel a certain way, and then I challenge them on that politely. And I have an entire series on my channel where I have discussions with people on the other side of things. And most of the time they go really well, but like I've only had one conversation with like a flat earther, and that did not go well at all. I mean, I spent the entire time laughing at him, but I mean, he was pretty much just ranting in a bigoted kind of way, you know, at me, calling me names and, you know, just saying that I was basically stupid. So that really wasn't productive. But for the most part, I have productive conversations where I try to find out why they think a certain thing, and then I tried to show them how they may be wrong on it, or how what they're saying doesn't make sense.
First of all, John, I want to defend your character for a second. I think you're a very nice guy in the public sphere. I don't know how much you actually map out to your personality online. I think you're very civil and very kind. So just so you don't get in a fight with Casey about that, I'm on John's side. Okay. So we have a couple different questions here, but I'd like you, if you could just touch on that flat earth conversation, because we did talk about that before, and I want to know what you think went wrong. Do you think that there's something you could have done differently? Do you think there was, an approach that could have been better suited for that kind of conversation? Or do you think with those kinds of people, it's a lost cause? Or what do you think about that?
Well, I think that there are some people that don't like want to have a conversation in good faith. I think that they come with an agenda, and then, you know, when you don't bend to their whim, or when you don't react like they want you to react, then they have a strong reaction. And that's really what happened in that conversation, because it started out kind of nice, but then at a certain point, he just sort of flips the switch and he goes into full bigoted rage mode. And it spends the rest of the time, acting like that. And so I don't think that in that situation, there was anything that I could really do to turn it around or anything like that. I think that there are certain people that just you can't have a conversation with, and you got to know when to stop having the conversation. I continued with the conversation because it was hilarious to me. But as far as having productive conversations, I think that you could, like, knowing when to stop having a conversation because you're not getting anything out of it is a very important thing to do.
I agree. And here's where I agree with you. I do hold the position that not everybody is capable of having these kinds of conversations, and that there are people who you just really can't talk about these things with. I think it's less people than how many people think there are. Well, let me rephrase that. I think there's more people that we can have conversations with than can't, than what people realize. I do think that context matters, and I do think approach matters, because especially when it comes to religious things, which ties into people's personal identities, oftentimes when those come up, people are often reacting before they're analyzing their statements or what you're saying. It's more of a response than it is an introspection. And so those kinds of conversations, if they do happen, I think need to take place in a long form where people can have their chance to kind of react and get it out there, and then just kind of, rationally look at things and analyze the conversation and see if their beliefs change from there. And I also think that beliefs don't necessarily change in a single conversation either. And I think that's important to keep in mind when we do these kinds of things, especially if we're talking to people who are on an extreme end of the spectrum, that being, flat earth types. I'm not saying that there aren't nice flat earth people, or that there aren't flat earth people worth talking to, but from the conversations I've seen, and from the ones that I've had, and the ones that I've seen you've had, John, that sometimes if you're holding that position, it's a lot. They want to fight you, and that's hard because you don't want to give way to that. You don't want to do what they're doing, sort of stoop to their level. You kind of want to stick to your guns and, try to be as nice and polite as possible. But sometimes people won't give you that opportunity. So it is.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes it's really hard not to fall into that pit of responding in kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So just so everyone who's watching is aware, the phone lines are open. They are working now. So if you want to call in to the number on screen, in case you can't see it, that's 512-686-0279. And if you call that number, you should be able to talk to one of our call screeners, and we can get you online. John has disappeared, but I'm still here. So I'm going to read some questions here. Let's see. So what are Dan and John's view of the current state of the atheist YouTube community? Is it in danger of becoming an echo chamber? I'll go ahead and answer for myself. I think it's possible. With any kind of online platforms that have recommendation features that are curating content, it's definitely possible for that to happen because you're constantly seeing the same kinds of things that you're already subscribed to over and over again. As far as, is it as bad as some other platforms? No, because people who are responding to things of interest are going to have different takes, and they're able to elaborate on those takes a little more succinctly through something like YouTube than you would say like a website because, let me explain, because when you're searching stuff on Google, if you search for any Christian stuff on Google, any Christian questions, at least for me, 99% of the time, the answer to those questions are going to come through Christian apologist websites, and not necessarily atheist sources or, I don't know, Islamic sources or other sources that may have different takes on those kinds of issues, like religious issues in general. So that's not good. But if you search stuff on the atheist YouTube kind of content sphere, you'll get different things depending on what you're looking up, I guess, more so, because there's a lot of YouTube channels that are really popular that are atheists that are, pulling in like millions of views sometimes. I mean, Dark Matter 2525, you've got Armored Skeptic, Shoe on Head, lots of people who are kind of in between the space of not just being secular content, but also other kinds of content as well. So that kind of brings in other kinds of audiences who may be looking up different things. I hope that's a little more clear. So I'll go ahead and keep reading some questions until John gets back. Again, this is an unofficial live stream of things for the show. This isn't like our real show yet, so it's okay that we're having some problems. We're not technically on the air yet. This is a test thing, so don't expect the real show to be like this, okay?
I'm
it's going to be better.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there he is. Yeah. John, did you hear the question?
Oh, no. What was the question?
Yeah, so I'll try to find it. But basically, it was asking, what do you think of the state of like YouTube atheists in the sense of, do you think it has the possibility of being an echo chamber?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a possibility of an echo chamber with any kind of group out there, and I don't think that atheism on YouTube is any different. I think that there definitely can be some echo chambers, but I think the important thing is that, with atheism, I guess like an echo chamber is not required, or at least it shouldn't be. And so I think trying to be a vocal voice or a vocal person against echo chambers is very important. And that's why I love it when people disagree with me. Now, a lot of people take me like not taking their shit as wanting an echo chamber, but that's not what that is, because there's a way that you can disagree with somebody and not treat them like shit and not be confrontational and not be like combative. There's a way to do that. And it just seems like a lot of people expect others to just take their shit, and if you don't take their shit, then you're a snowflake or whatever, or you want an echo chamber or whatever like that. I just think that if people can learn to have good conversations and learn to disagree, respectfully, then I think that we can definitely not have echo chambers or not have any kind of rift or whatnot in the community.
Yeah, and I was also bringing up the point, John, that especially with your videos, I didn't use you as an example, but you actually are. I mean, your videos pull in views from actually all sorts of different audiences. If you think about it, I mean, I'm thinking of your flat earth videos in particular, but there's lots of people that think flat earth people aren't right, or not just atheists or skeptics, right? I mean, there's a lot of people that kind of, just think that that's funny. And so you're kind of bringing in those kinds of points of view. I would say there's probably more religious people that are watching those videos than atheists necessarily, only because you bring kind of a more popular mainstream audience to those. So,
well, yeah, and my audience, though, like it would take a very specific kind of religious person, a religious person that doesn't mind like the cursing and the light jokes, really.
Yeah.
Because like I would say that most of my content is geared towards people of a religious or non-religious mindset, like the flat earth stuff. Whenever I debunk anti-science or whatnot, like a lot of the times I try to pick things that are either on the fringe or close to it. Like, I never try to pick like a reasonable Christian that's sitting there making a video like, oh yeah, I believe in God, because of these reasons. Like, on those particular videos, I don't go as hard. Like, I try to sit down and I just respectfully explain why these aren't good reasons. But then you get the crazy out there kind of videos where, like, I think this past week there was a preacher that was talking about how women don't have bodily autonomy and like they don't have rights to their bodies.
Oh,
and so it's like, at that point, I think that even Christians can get on board and be like, no, that's pretty screwy right there.
I do think that, yeah, I agree that I do think we do have a problem sometimes where we kind of like to go after the kind of more fringe ideas. And I think people may criticize that and say, well, that's not an accurate picture of what I believe, or, what my Christianity says or something. And I do see that as a problem because I wish there were more videos that addressed my specific beliefs in particular, because I was not a fundamentalist. I was not an evangelical. And a lot of atheist criticism videos are usually about those kinds of things, just because there's a lot more claims that are being made that are sometimes easier to take apart. So I would hope that there are more people who can address those kinds of, other points of view. But, they're definitely out there. It's just about giving a platform for those voices, letting other people know that they're there. But let's go ahead and take in a call. So we have Ryan from, what is this? Is this California calling in, asking about street epistemology? Ryan, you're on the air. What's up? Hello, Ryan. Can you hear me? Okay. We're not getting any audio on this end, and the call is ended. Okay. Cool. So we have another caller here. I'm not sure if that's something wrong with our systems or if it was just with the caller, but we do have someone else. This is Adam, also calling in from California. Adam, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Awesome. Cool. So it says you actually talked to Godless Engineer before, and you kind of wanted to talk about that?
He debated me. We had a debate together, so I wanted to call and give him props for actually stepping up. And I've been trying to get some constructive dialogue going for a long time. So
okay, right on.
It was kind of cool of him to step up and debate. He actually cheated, but I'm willing to forgive him for that. So
I don't remember. I'm not sure which debate we had.
I'm Adam, friended forever.
Oh, friended.
We debated on non sequitur. Cheated.
I remember. I didn't connect like your first name to your channel. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I don't think I cheated though.
I changed I started using my first name, so I changed the channel name a while back. So, okay. But you totally cheated. What are you talking about? It was at one time it was 4-on-1. You had your girlfriend in the background yelling at me, and both the hosts were taking your side.
Okay. Before we get into this beef, we need some context here for those of you who, like me, who don't know what the heck y'all are talking about.
Okay, so from my point of view, I thought that we were going to be discussing, what was it? You had a few papers that you had brought up, and I read over them a little bit, and I thought that we were going to have a conversation over one particular aspect of anti-theism. It was basically that I couldn't, no anti-theist had supported. It was something on the basis of morality without religion or something like that. But the actual conversation was supposed to be over, is anti-theism rational? And so it kind of seemed like there was a bunch of like crosstalk as far as like the actual conversation was supposed to go. But I mean, the debate I thought went fine. If you just look at the parts where it was me interacting with Adam here, and I thought Adam did well in the debate, and I appreciated having the debate.
Yeah, it was fun. I think discussing these ideas is always good, like however it goes. So I think it's always constructive.
So Adam, you are an atheist, correct?
I am, yeah.
Okay, cool. Just making sure.
The dispute is really over the secular utility religion. And the reason why I was saying that anti-theism is an irrational position is because, I mean, you really have to do like a cost-benefit analysis on religion. I heard you guys talking about the Catholic priest scandals, and I mean, those are abhorrent, obviously. We have to keep those things in check. But, I mean, I look at religion as kind of an institution, and, yeah, there's going to be corruption. But, I mean, an equivalent idea would be kind of saying because we uncover some corruption in a police department that all of a sudden we don't need police, which I think obviously we do need police, right?
Well, okay, so here's what I would say. What is it that the Catholic Church does that couldn't be accomplished through a secular institution?
Well, people are looking for meaning in their lives. And the Catholic Church gives them a sense of purpose. And if they don't find a sense of purpose there, they often go looking for a sense of purpose elsewhere. And I just feel like religion has this, it's kind of been through this product cycle, this evolutionary product cycle for millions of years, where these new kinds of religions that are cropping up are not necessarily, they haven't been tested. So I feel like the evolutionary process kind of weeds out behaviors that are not pro-social. But I feel like there are kinds of religions that are popping up now that aren't pro-social. I feel like kind of people are turning to social justice a lot as a way to find meaning in their lives. And I think social justice doesn't, I mean, it's a newly forming philosophy. So I mean, it's bound to make mistakes.
Okay, so several things here, though. So you're saying that it needs to be there because people can find truth and meaning in their lives through these institutions, but can they not find truth and meaning in their lives through ways besides going to church?
Yes, definitely. But finding communal meaning, I mean, you're looking for some kind of institution for that.
Well, sure. So I'm right here at the atheist community of Austin. We have tons of atheists that come every week that meet with other atheists and talk about things that they care about. And my question, I guess, is why do we need to support an institution that takes billions and billions of dollars every year for something that could be done with the same kind of budget that we have, which I guarantee is not near the amount that the Catholic Church is producing?
Well, a lot of derive their ethics from these religions. These religions have an ethical system, and if you think of the ethical system kind of like in atheist terms, like Richard Dawkins talks about memes, right? Mm-hmm. So I read this book that made a huge impression on me. It's called Beyond Revenge. I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but a lot of what caused society to become more wealthy was this idea of forgiveness. Like our gut response when someone wrongs us is to get even. Mm-hmm. And until people can learn to be more forgiving, then pro-social behaviors don't always get off the ground.
Okay.
Like, there's an argument to be made that some of these third world countries, they don't have that meme of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And especially in Christianity, I think it really puts that meme of forgiveness into the culture. Now, I don't know, you're talking about this Austin group that you guys are forming. Mm-hmm. Like, do you have a position on forgiveness? Is it codified? Like, how do you get people to be more forgiving?
Atheist Community of Austin has been around for over 20 years now around here, and they've been providing services for the community for a long time since then. But here's an interesting thought, Adam. You picked up this idea of forgiveness, and you got it from this book. Right? I mean, mm-hmm. Obviously you are familiar with Christian conceptions of it, but it wasn't as important to you until you read it from this book, right? I mean, I
read it from the book because the book actually does like scientific studies.
Sure, but at what point was a religious institution involved with you understanding the importance of forgiveness?
Well, I mean, I was raised a Christian, so I mean, I inherently understood forgiveness from my Christian up.
Do you think if you weren't a Christian, though, that you wouldn't have an understanding of forgiveness?
Well, there's a lot of cultures that don't embrace forgiveness. I think you have whatever concept of, I think you're pro-forgiveness or pro-revenge, depending upon the environment that you grow up in. If you grow up in a very harsh environment, pro-revenge is actually going to be more advantageous, according to game theory. I mean, the book covers this.
So, yeah, I understand that there is a value. I'm not disagreeing with you on that. That the value of forgiveness is...
You're in a very environment and you are pro-social, you're just going to get preyed upon. So your only options are really to turn your pro-sociality off.
Okay.
Adam?
Yeah.
Do you think that somebody raised without religion can't know anything about forgiveness?
No, I think they can, but I mean, as social creatures, we drink in the ethics that are around us. We drink in the philosophy that's around us. I'm just saying that religion has this kind of bag of memes that it puts into the culture that I think if we examine those bag of memes, we're going to find out that those memes are very useful for sustaining the kind of culture that we have now.
Okay.
You get rid of those memes at your peril.
Okay, so I agree with you that religion can and does provide those benefits through this bag of memes analogy that you're giving us here, but it's a mixed bag. For every meme of forgiveness that goes around through Christianity, there's a meme of I'm not good enough as a person because I had lustful thoughts, you know.
That's actually good. That's actually a good meme too, though.
Well, okay, no, I don't think people should. I don't think people should feel guilty for having homosexual thoughts, though.
The homosexual one is not the. You said something different. Now
sure, okay, yeah, I agree. But lustful thoughts in general, I mean, having those thoughts aren't necessarily bad for society. It's more like the actions that come about of those thoughts. You know, like what we're seeing in the Catholic.
But the idea that you are imperfect and you need to self-improve is a good meme. I totally agree with you on the homosexuality.
Yeah, but you see the problem though. Like Christianity doesn't necessarily the ends to that means, you know, of self-improvement are for different goals. It's for being better for God's sake, or being a better Christian. It's not necessarily for like yourself or your own self-identified goals. Do you see the problem here? I'm just trying to point out that even if religion does promote these pro-social behaviors, there's a lot of bad things that come with that because it's a package deal. Whereas if we, now follow me here, these secular institutions or even atheist ones, but I'll stick with secular ones right now, or not even secular necessarily, just not Christianity, right? I mean, like, let's talk about like the Unitarian Church, for instance. I mean, yes, some of them are Christian, but I mean, most of them aren't. That's a religious environment where people can bring out, you know, great ideas and live in communities without all the baggage of, you know, like you're a terrible person and you have to do these things to please God. You know, I think that can exist without having to say, well, you know, I like the Catholic Church with all the good stuff, but you know, we just have to support this institution because it's the best thing for society. I don't know if that's the case.
My whole point in our debate, Adam, was that I see religion as one vehicle of control, and they're amongst a lot of different vehicles of control or vehicles in which to express these ideas. But at the heart of it, these vehicles are man-made, regardless of what angle you come at it from, because the vehicle is an abstraction for just how to communicate these ideas or how to codify these ideas. Because I mean, in a society, you can teach your children about forgiveness. It's just the fact that in the past, a lot of people use religion as the vehicle in which to teach about these things. But you see, that's the whole thing about being progressive, like how our civilizations are very progressive, and the fact that we've recognized that we don't necessarily need religion as the vehicle to teach these things. And that's my anti-theism, I guess, in a nutshell. There is that it's an old vehicle that I think has a lot more problems than it actually solves, and that we have better vehicles now in which to teach like morals, values, forgiveness, or any of these things that you attribute to religion.
Adam, you still there?
Oh, his phone dropped.
Oh, shoot. Well, that's too bad. Okay, well, we just we went on our soapboxes there for a little bit and we didn't give Adam a chance to respond. So, Adam, if you're there, you're more than welcome to call back and we'll get you on. But until then, thanks for calling. And I'd love to hear what you have to say because we did talk for quite a bit there. Cool. So we have another caller on the line here. This was Ryan that was trying to call earlier. Ryan, we're going to try you again. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Perfect. Thank you.
I heard you wanted to talk about some street epistemology stuff and faith healing.
I wasn't sure what the format of the thing was going to be here because I know it's supposed to be the street epistemology show, so yes. I wasn't sure if you were going to be asking me questions or what. But
potentially. Well, it depends on what you have to bring to us.
Well, so I'm an atheist, and I guess one topic I could bring up might be an experience that I've had around. I guess it sort of involves faith healing, but it more gets into baggage from my former Christianity, I guess.
Okay,
you might say.
Sure.
When I was still a Christian, and this goes back probably 13-ish years ago now. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I was a larger lad then than I am now. I think I was probably, hitting close to 300 pounds or something like that. And so at the time, I was pretty freaked out. I had a crappy doctor who really didn't explain anything to me. And I basically left very, very afraid of what do I do? And so, of course, the first thing was, get all of my Christian friends and all of my church people to pray about it, right? Mm-hmm. And, over time, what kind of happened was that, I had a lot of reassurances from all these people that, don't worry, God's going to take care of it for you. I was pretty adamant about not taking medication, and part of that was also from a bit of a woo thinking because of ideas that were put into my head by a chiropractor. But I think one thing that happened that really crystallized it for me was that my best friend at the time, who was one of my kind of spiritual mentors in a way. His dad is a Anglican minister who does all kinds of he goes all over the world and does spiritual warfare and battling ley lines, all this kind of stuff that really fascinated me at the time with prophetic visions and blah, blah, blah. We were kind of Pentecostal, so you can kind of imagine. But my friend had this dream or a vision or whatever.
Hey, Ryan, I'm just going to interrupt you for just 1 second to tell our producers that I don't think the link I have is working anymore. And I don't know if there's another link to the live stream or not. I'm not sure if we're actually live.
Oh.
So anyway,
I can see this.
Okay. So maybe it's just on my end. Anyway, go ahead and continue.
Yeah, so he had this dream or vision or whatever you want to call it, where he basically said that God had told him, and he was very confident about this, that if I kind of did the work on being healthier, that God would actually heal me of the diabetes. It would be taken away. Mm. And this became a really serious, important aspect of this for me, because I was still pretty freaked out about, like, what do I do with this? And at the same time, I did what he suggested. I changed my eating habits. I started working out, and I lost about 100 pounds. And magically, my diabetes seemed to go away. At least all of my test results went back into the normal range, as I now understand would be expected when you lose 100 pounds in a fairly short period of time. And so I kind of felt like, okay, I've dealt with this. And it was like confirmation of that sort of prophetic whatever, where it's going to be healed. And so at that point, I kind of figured, okay, God's healed it and it's over with now. In the back of my mind, I don't think I ever really believed that, but it was what I wanted to think. So that's kind of how I operated. And so fast forwarding to, after I ceased to be a Christian, I had found that one of the effects of this was, even after I stopped believing in the God thing, was that I still had this thing in my mind that told me that, oh, the diabetes has been dealt with. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And I kind of figured that as I examine it in retrospect, I can sort of recognize where I didn't really believe it, but I wanted to believe it. And so I just acted like it was true. And, of course, my doctor and whoever else had been kind of telling me, look, your numbers look good now, but they may not always, because the body works in a particular way. And, when you have diabetes, this is what happens. It's gonna catch up to you eventually. You gotta be proactive about it. And of course, I just kind of ignored it. It was like, it was almost like this very intense fear of mine to not even want to know anything about it. Because at a certain point I had accepted God's dealt with it. And then that translated into, oh, it's dealt with. And any suggestion that I should get it checked even, or that I should think about it or whatever was like, I snapped those things away very, very quickly. And it became a real actual fear of going to the doctor, actually, because I think, it was like a very cognitive dissonance thing, right? Where it's like one half of my brain knew I was going to get bad news if I went to the doctor. And the other half was like fighting with that, going, no, you don't have to worry about it. Anyway, as it's turned out, yeah, I do need to have medication, because my stuff was climbing up there again. But it took years and years, and, the love of a very good woman to kind of push me and go, you know what, you need to go to the doctor for me, because I want you to be around for a long time. Anyway, I guess that's sort of in a nutshell what I thought I would talk about is, I'm still dealing with that fallout a little bit, but now that I think I've gotten back to the rational side of my thinking with this, I'm on the medication and things are a lot better. But it was a very weird piece of baggage that stuck with me for a long, long time.
Yeah. So this is what's called magical thinking. And it sounds very derogatory, but it's actually very serious, and it can be a very serious problem. If you've ever seen my interview with Anthony, when I did my follow-up with him about where I am now, the week before I went to talk to him, I was having nightmares of me either going to hell or putting myself in a life or death situation where I could choose God and go to heaven with him when I die, or go straight to hell. And I was already an atheist at this point. I already did not, consciously believe, but the religion was so ingrained in me that I was still struggling with this thing. And I felt really guilty about stuff. And it didn't make any sense, because there was nothing for me to be guilty about. I was being honest with myself and who I was. But the indoctrination that I experienced, kind of colored that and made it harder for me to do things. So what I'll say from my experience is it does get better. It has gotten better for me. I think the best way for me to have gotten it better is to involve myself in community with like-minded people who have also experienced similar backgrounds and situations. I'm fortunate to be a part of the Secular Student Alliance in my area, where I can talk to other people my age about their experiences and stuff. And if I was going to give you advice on how to deal with that, I mean, that's just the best way to do it. But as far as for other people, is this like a real thing? Is this a phenomenon that happens to people who are skeptics and have been for like 10 years and still have these kinds of thoughts? Absolutely. And we know that because lots and lots of people have reported on similar experiences. I'm sure John could maybe attest to that too.
Well, yeah, actually, I've got diabetes as well, except mine's type 1. Yeah, so I'm insulin dependent, and I'm also insulin resistant, so, you know, I'm fucked twice. But,
sorry to hear that.
But no, yeah, the magical, I agree with everything that Dan was saying here, that it's being, you know, magical thinking. And I actually did a response video to a kid who, well, it wasn't a kid. There was a kid in the video, but basically it was a video that was talking about how God will heal you. And this kid had diabetes and he was on medication and everything like that. And, you know, I feel so bad for people that think that like, oh, well, if I'm just a better Christian, or if I'm, you know, better at this or I'm better at that, you know, it'll clear up my diabetes, instead of, you know, actually working for it. Which, I mean, honestly, it took me a while to actually start to work to get like my diabetes in control. I actually, at the second Reason rally, I actually collapsed in my hotel room, and I vomited the entire night because I was in ketoacidosis.
Oh, yeah, that's dangerous.
Yeah, and so I almost died. And it was because my doctor wasn't prescribing me enough insulin to get me to the next appointment, you know. So it took me a while to get my insulin in control, because with, you know, insulin resistance as well as being a type 1 diabetic, I mean, it's been really difficult. So, I mean, I haven't had the same. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you know, having educated myself about diabetes, yeah, I mean, that's obviously a really tough situation to be in. A guy that I went to elementary school with, his brother actually died because he was having a hypoglycemic episode while they were on the highway, and he jumped out of the car to run across the street to go to the gas station and get a chocolate bar, and he got hit by a car. And it's, you know, so it's sort of a tangent, obviously, but yeah, it can be freaky.
But as far as like being tied to my previous beliefs and everything like that, for me, it was more of a light switch kind of thing when it comes to like religion, because I wasn't all that attached to it. But I definitely sympathize with everybody that was really attached to their beliefs, and they still have a lot of hard times with it, because like my biggest hurdle was getting over the, you know, fact that I was an atheist, like getting over calling myself an atheist and being okay with not believing in God. That was my big hurdle. But I mean, I think everybody has like a big hurdle to get over whenever they're deconverting out of faith. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely had a moment where I was on a walk on my lunch break where it had been a few years of me kind of deconstructing my Christianity and kind of like taking things out of it that I didn't like anymore, like, you know, homosexual stuff and, you know, a lot of the Old Testament I just kind of throw out because I'm like, oh my God, this is awful, you know, and just kind of getting down to like really like, oh, I got to find the real Jesus kind of thing, right? And I found myself like starting to listen to Hutchins and The Atheist Experience and Dawkins and like being on the side of them and in debates going, oh my God, why is this other side so ridiculous? And not realizing that was the side that I was still professing to be on. And it was while I was listening to, I think a video by Qualia Soup or Theremin Trees on YouTube or whatever. And he was talking about his own, you know, sort of transition from religion to atheism and all of the emotions that he went through. And I had this moment where I realized, I think he's talking about what I'm doing right now. And I actually stopped in my tracks and I said out loud, holy shit, I think I'm an atheist. What do I do now?
Yeah.
So going back to this, how to deal with this magical thinking. I'm not a licensed psychologist, and I'm not a licensed therapist, but there are potential avenues you could look into. First of all, if you're not familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, I would strongly recommend looking into that, especially if you're experiencing symptoms as long as you have. It might be an option to look into seeing how that therapy can be treated for you. I think one of the best things you can do right now, if you can't afford that, is seriously just like look up the Wikipedia article for magical thinking. You know, like be cognizant and be aware of when it's happening, and try not to fall back into those compulsive behaviors if you're experiencing that. So for me, my compulsive behavior was to pray and also to kind of admit to somebody when I'm kind of having these thoughts. You know, like we are often told in Christian circles to keep things in the light, you know, to kind of talk about it with your peers and things like that. So rejecting these kinds of behaviors so that you don't follow through with them might be able to help. I mean, there's all kinds of other ways to go about it. But just the start would be to just be aware, be mindful, and practice mindfulness of, you know, when you're experiencing these things, if you recognize on a conscious level, like, oh, this is this thought pattern that I picked up years ago and I haven't broken yet, that's going to help kind of break that cycle. It's very, very similar to what people experience with OCD tendencies. You know, like, oh, they feel like these compulsive behaviors are out of their control to some degree. And to some degree, they're right. But it starts with taking charge of what we can be in control of and working from there. And that's kind of how you have to deal with this.
Yeah, and I'm happy to say I think I'm more or less over it. Mm-hmm. You know, I every now and then I'll catch myself being a little bit like, I can let it slide a bit. But I've gotten to the point where, you know, I had to accept that, you know, having information was better than not having information. And when I got the information and realized, okay, this is telling me stuff that's not cool, then it was accepting that, okay, everything that I kind of had thought, I have to unpack that and let it be not true and accept a new reality. And when I did that and I started taking medication, then, you know, looking forward actually to going to the doctor, which was a big thing for me because I had this like weird white coat syndrome going on because of my original doctor who just freaked the shit out of me. Mm-hmm. And I have a really, really awesome doctor now and have had for years, but it was always just that, like, every time I go, I feel nervous. And it's largely because I was avoiding wanting to know things. But once I did, and I've been on a much better track for a couple of years now. But now I actually feel such a sense of relief because I'm like, okay, I have a really good doctor who's watching out for me. I have medication that's protecting me from the worst of this thing, and I can go and see what my numbers are, and they're good now. Mm-hmm. And I actually know why they're good. It's not just hopefully they're good this time. Hopefully whatever. It's honestly like I know what's doing it and I know why and I understand the mechanisms. And it makes it so much easier to like go through life now, not having that like little worry in the back of my mind that I have to just shove away. Now my eyes are open and it feels a lot better.
Yeah, that's so great. Isn't it wonderful to know that you're taking medicine that's based on evidence so that you can have more assurance than anybody else in knowing that it's probably going to work, and you're not relying on some sort of random chance.
Yes, it is.
Pretty wonderful
much
stuff.
nicer.
Well, I think that's about all the time that we have for our show today. Thank you again for calling, Ryan. I really appreciate that, and I hope that you call again whenever the show gets on live for real.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Okay, so like I said, I think we're going to wrap it up for tonight. For those of you that are still watching us live, thank you so much for this kind of technical nightmare that we got to experience today. Like I said, this is why we do these test shows. This is why we work on everything before we go official and live. So what you should know is that I do have a Facebook page now. It's called Truth Wanted. So if you want to hear more updates on that, you should definitely ask to join the Facebook page. And also follow me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan. We'll be giving more updates on the show as they go along. We are planning to premiere next month. I do not have a specific date for you, but it is going to happen next month. That's about as much of a guarantee as I can give right now. John, if people want to find you, where should they go?
Well, they should definitely go to my YouTube, Godless Engineer, and then, of course, on Facebook, Godless Engineering. You can find me both those. Well, Twitter also, Godless Engineer. I'm pretty much Godless Engineer any and everywhere.
Yeah. That's awesome. Okay, well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Truth Wanted. I can't wait to try this again without as much technical glitches. And we'll be doing this again on Friday nights at 6. So yeah, that's all for today's show. Remember, the truth is out there, maybe. So we'll see you next time.